At my son's Thanksgiving dinner, my pregnant daughter-in-law grabbed a bowl of hot soup and hurled it straight at my face in front of 40 guests. She screamed, "You made me lose my baby. You destroyed everything we had." I turned to my son. He put his arm around her and said, "Dad, you always have to make it about yourself." I walked out with soup burning on my face. I thought that was the worst moment of my life. I was wrong. I want to tell you something about welding before I tell you anything else. When you run a bead, when you press that electrode against two separate pieces of metal and hold the arc steady, you are not just joining them. You are changing them permanently. The heat travels all the way through. You can grind the surface smooth, afterward paint over it, polish it until no seam shows under the light. But the bond is there. The metal remembers. Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you're here with me today. If this is your first time, take a moment and subscribe so the next story finds its way to you. Before we get into it, let me ask you something simple. Have you ever had someone you loved look you in the eye and lie to you? Not once, but for months. I'd like to hear from you in the comments. Now, a word before we begin. Some elements of this story have been shaped for the purposes of audio storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. It's the truth inside the story that matters. This past year, I have turned that question over more times than I can count. What truly binds? What merely gives the appearance of binding? Conrad Briley is my name, 62 years old. 4 decades at Briley Boatworks, right there on Marblehead Harbor. I came up as an apprentice under my father-in-law's eye, earned my journeyman ticket, and eventually became the man this place leans on when 3 things break at once and everyone else looks at the floor. Marblehead, Massachusetts does not traffic in glamour. Up on the North Ridge, you have the old estates, the generational money, the families who treated summering as a birthright long before it became a word anyone else used. Down at the South End, you get the working waterfront repair docks, diesel fumes, salt air that finds its way into the fabric of your coat and takes up permanent residence. The South End is where I have spent every year of my life. My first breath was drawn 3 blocks from the harbor. I expect my last will be taken close enough to hear the water. Dorothea, my wife, died when our boy Fletcher was still 9 years old. Pancreatic cancer, the variety that gives you no warning until it has already written the ending. 14 months ran from the day of diagnosis to the day she was gone, and across every one of them, I doubled my shifts and stripped the house of anything worth selling to pay for her care. My first truck went. A second mortgage came. I pulled from my pension at the yard just to keep up. Dorothea told me I had to quit doing that. She pushed herself upright in the bed, locked both hands around my wrist, and said, "Conrad, you are going to need that money when I'm gone." I gave her the only honest answer I had, that the money did not matter to me, and that I could not bring myself to think about a time after her. That undid her. The sobs came from somewhere deep, and they moved through her whole frame, and I held on and wept right with her, because pretending I was steady would have been an insult to both of us. I share this so you know the kind of man I am before I walk you into the year that cracked everything open. After his mother died, Fletcher turned quiet and inward. He carried himself with a gravity that surprised me, settled at the kitchen table each night and worked through his homework, like he had concluded that accomplishment was the one fortress grief could not breach. In his way, he was correct. A scholarship to the University of Massachusetts for architecture was his reward. The afternoon he found out, he rang me from his dorm. I had to set the phone down on the mattress and cover my mouth with both fists, so he would not catch me coming apart. 15 years of 12-hour days had been quietly pointed at that call. He used the name he had for me when he was small before growing up, pushed him toward Dad like every other kid said. "Dad, I did it. I know you did," I told him. "Your mother always knew you would." A beat of silence. "Then do you think she can tell?" "I think she's been watching the whole time," I said. I meant every word. I still do. Fletcher went on to build something real. An architecture firm in Boston took him on, and inside 6 years, he had made partner his name beginning to appear, alongside projects that turned up in publications I would never have occasion to read otherwise. I saved every piece of coverage. Tucked in the second drawer of my workbench, wedged between a packet of spare welding tips and a roll of electrical tape, is a folder thick with those printouts and clippings. I never breathed a word to him about it. That is simply not how a man like me operates. Then Fletcher came home with Celinda Aldred. A Thursday evening in October, 2 years before any of what I'm about to lay out for you. 31 years old, dark hair posture so precise you could tell somebody had drilled it into her from an early age. The Aldred family controlled the biggest commercial real estate portfolio in Norfolk County. Her father, Prescott Aldred, offered the handshake of a confident man and the soft palms of someone who had never once swung a hammer and seemed entirely unbothered by the gap. Fletcher telephoned me the evening before and said, "Dad, her family, they're a certain kind of people. Just, don't wear the jacket with the patch on the elbow." Something fell in my chest right then. Not over the jacket, over what that sentence revealed about which version of me my son felt he had to prepare them for. "I'll wear my good flannel," I told him. A silence. Maybe the button down. The blue one. Fletcher? I held my voice steady while my ribs tightened around the feeling. Is putting on a blue button down going to make me somebody different when I come through that door? He let out a slow breath. "No, Dad, of course not. They pick up on things. So do I said. "That's fine. We can all pick up on things together." He laughed a short, tentative sound that didn't quite find solid ground. I went along with the laugh because saying what was actually in my head would have cost too much. What was in my head was, this son. If this woman's people need you to get out ahead of me before I have even crossed the threshold, that is a piece of information a man should file away carefully. I wore the blue button down. Sally shook my hand at the door behind a smile that recruited every muscle in her face while leaving her eyes entirely uninvolved. Her mother, Rosalind, pressed a glass of wine I had never encountered into my hand, and then directed the next 40 minutes of conversation squarely at Fletcher's left shoulder. Prescott inquired about the boatworks in the measured tone of a man deploying a safe topic, so he will not have to locate another one, and Fletcher arranged himself at that table into whatever shape the room required, the way someone does when he has long since memorized the fit. On the way back, both hands tight on my work truck's wheel, the one carrying rust along the wheel, Wells' 40 years of yard smell sealed into every surface. I made a deliberate effort to say the charitable thing aloud. I have noticed it tends to take on some truth in the saying. "She seems to care about him," I told the windshield. "That's what matters." The windshield offered no opinion either way. Harbor lights slid past to my left. The cab smelled the way it always does, metal salt. Underneath that, the ghost of coffee soaked into the passenger seat back in February. I turned into the driveway and let the engine idle longer than necessary. My jacket pocket held my small notebook, the one that goes wherever I go, the old canvas-covered one with the broken clasp that I have been meaning to replace for 3 years. I keep notes the way a careful nurse charts a patient relentlessly, because an event without a record is an event you will eventually lose the right to claim. I pulled the notebook free, opened to a clean page, and wrote a single line across the top. I thought I knew my son. Then I drew a line beneath it. Notebook back in the pocket inside soup, reheated from the pot I had left sitting. I was not yet prepared to examine what that sentence was telling me, but 4 decades around metal have taught me one dependable truth. The crack announces itself before the thing actually gives way. You have to be watching for it. I was watching. I had been watching my whole life. Nobody could strip that from me. The Aldred house occupied the north ridge of Marblehead, the way a monument occupies high ground, as though its purpose were to make the lower town aware of the distance. White colonial 3 stories, black shutters a circular drive that had received exactly 0 work trucks before mine rattled up at that first Sunday in April, engine knocking slightly left, a cracked windshield I had been carrying since February. Before I even killed the ignition, a man in a white jacket appeared from a side entrance and offered to take the truck around back somewhere out of view. "That's all right," I said, climbing out with my flannel squared away. "I'll collect it myself when I leave." He smiled the particular smile of a person who has chosen not to press further. I took to him right away. Come that spring, Fletcher and Seeley ran Sunday dinners at the Aldred house on a 2-week rotation. Family gatherings was the phrase they used, though who actually showed up tracked closely with whoever Prescott was cultivating that weekend. I attended everyone. Up the ridge in my work truck parked somewhere, it would cause no embarrassment. Then seated at a table where a single fork was worth more than my electric bill. I was not at ease there. I will not pretend otherwise. My idea of a decent lunch is a bowl of something hot, eaten standing at a workbench. The Aldred dining room swung a chandelier, the scale of a small boat engine, above a table you could have used as a runway. That spring I taught myself to identify 3 kinds of wine by taste alone. Not out of any pleasure in the exercise, but because Rosalind Aldred had a particular way of watching your face when you reached for the wrong glass that made the lesson impossible to forget. Han, she said one evening in May, her voice warm the way costly things are warm, surface only. Fletcher tells us you've been at the boatworks since before he was born. That must give you such a sense of continuity. It gives me a paycheck, I said, keeping my tone pleasant. And I like the work. Prescott chuckled from his end of the table. There's a lot to be said for a man who knows his place. He announced to the room and reached for the wine. He intended it as a compliment. I am nearly certain he intended it as a compliment. I looked down the length of the table at Fletcher, who was cutting his lamb chop into progressively smaller pieces and studying his plate as though it owed him something. That was what I could not shake about those dinners. Not the remarks about my truck, not the chandelier, not the fact that every question aimed my way required no more than a polite sentence in reply. It was Fletcher. It was the performance I was watching my son put on. He had always been a quiet boy, but this was a different kind of quiet. At the Aldred table, Fletcher was precise. Every word measured, every laugh, timed to the second, every opinion pitched at exactly the volume and duration the room seemed to call for. He was topping off Prescott's glass before it ran low. He was agreeing with Rosalind about the city council, without so much as a blink. Anyone looking from outside would have taken him for a man perfectly at home in those surroundings. I had worked with my hands for 40 years. I knew the difference between metal that was solid clear through and metal that carried only a surface plate. That plating can deceive you for a long while, right up until the load changes. In June, Fletcher rang me on a Tuesday evening, which was out of the ordinary. He was a weekend caller by habit. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice carrying that particular careful quality it took on when he was steering something. "I wanted to give you a heads up before Sunday. Prescott is going to be talking about the Rowley Crossing project, the development over on Route 7. He might ask for your opinion on the structural elements. I'm a boatyard welder, Fletcher," I said. "Not a structural engineer, I know that." A pause. "I just mean, you know how to speak to those things. Construction materials." He respects that kind of expertise. My chest pulled tight. Not because of what he said, but because of what he left out, which was, "I want you to impress them, Dad. I need you to impress them." And beneath that, the thing neither of us would go near directly. "I am afraid of what happens if you don't. I'll do my best," I told him. "I always do my best." "I know you do." His voice gave slightly on that last word, and for just a moment he sounded exactly like the 9-year-old who used to fall asleep in my truck on the ride home from Little League Forehead, pressed to the window, trusting completely that I would get us there. Something drew tight in my throat, a love so fierce it came close to making me furious. "Fletcher," I said carefully, "are you happy?" A beat then too quickly. "Of course. Things are really good, Dad. Celie and I are great. That's not what I asked." Another breath, longer. "I'm good," he said. "I really am. It's just there's a lot of moving pieces right now. Work, the family stuff, a lot to manage." I wanted to ask him which family he meant when he said family. Whether he meant us, him and me, the two people who had eaten cereal for dinner in a cold, drafty house on the south end of Marblehead, because the furnace had quit and neither of us wanted to say so, or whether he meant the Aldreds up on their ridge with their chandelier and their Rowley Crossing project. I did not ask. I told him Sunday sounded fine, hung up the phone, and stood in my kitchen with my hand still resting on the receiver, as if I were waiting for a follow-up call that would clarify the first one. That same evening I realized I had left my canvas notebook on the Aldred dining room table the Sunday before. I had retrieved it before leaving, but not before Rosalind had lifted it, turned it over once in her hands, and set it down, wearing an expression I had catalogued carefully, and not yet allowed myself to examine. 2 days on, at a Sunday lunch, Celie leaned toward Fletcher and spoke just below the level of the general conversation, though not below mine. "Sweetheart, would you remind your dad that the table is probably not the best place for work things?" Her voice was gentle the way a scalpel is gentle, built for a precise kind of cut. Fletcher's jaw tightened once. Then he smoothed it away. He turned to me with a smile that didn't travel all the way to his eyes and said, "Hey, Dad, maybe keep the notebook in your jacket pocket, easier that way." My hands went cold around the stem of my wine glass. I looked at my son. This man I had sold my truck for, this man I had held together through every loss his life had delivered, and I watched him make his choice, watched him weigh it, watched him land where the explaining would be least. "Of course," I said. I kept my voice level. I kept my face level. I lifted the wine glass, took a sip, and tasted nothing at all. "Makes sense. On the drive home that night, I said nothing to the windshield. I went all the way down to the harbor before I stopped. Sat there with the engine idling, looking out at the water, the dock lights lying across the surface in long, fractured lines. Then I pulled out the notebook. I turned to the page below, the one that read, "I thought I knew my son." Beneath it, I put down 4 words. "They have a price." I did not yet write what the price was. Not yet, but I knew the way you know when a weld is running cold, when the bead is failing to fuse the way it ought, that I was going to find out, and that I was not going to like the number. There is a kind of conversation that only takes place at kitchen tables late at night. Not the dining room variety, not the kind surrounded by the right silverware and the right wine, and 4 decades of inherited wealth in the walls around you. The kitchen table kind happens under a single overhead bulb that is always a shade too harsh, with cold coffee cooling further between your palms, and nowhere to look except straight at the person sitting across from you. No chandelier to draw the eye away. No man in a white jacket buffering the atmosphere. Just 2 people, and whatever truth one of them drove across town to say. Fletcher came on a Tuesday evening in July. I heard his car in the driveway, that new sedan Sealy had chosen engine nearly silent. Nothing like the rattling trucks I had run my whole life. And I knew before he knocked that something was wrong. A father learns the sound of his son's footsteps the way a welder learns the sound of a failing arc. You cannot put it into words. You just know. I had the door open before he could raise his hand. He looked thin. Not ill-thin, the kind of thin that arrives from nights not slept and lunches skipped because your mind has gone somewhere else entirely. His tie was pulled loose. His jacket hung over one arm. He stood on my porch in the July heat and tried to get a smile going. It didn't make it past his chin. "Hey, Dad," he said, "you got a few minutes?" "I've got all night," I told him. "Get in here." I poured him a glass of water, because that was what he needed, not coffee. And I sat across from him at the kitchen table, where he had done his schoolwork for 12 years. He turned the glass between his hands around and around, not drinking, just turning. "Fletcher?" I kept my tone steady even as something dropped in my stomach. "Whatever it is, just say it." He pushed a hard breath out through his nose, the sound of a man setting down a weight he has been carrying too long. "Sally and I have been trying to have a baby," he said, "for about 1.5 years now. It hasn't been working." The ache hit my chest instantly, that particular parental ache that does not dull no matter how many years separate you from the small boy you used to carry. "I didn't know that," I said carefully. "I'm sorry, son. We kept it private," he said, jaw going tight. "We didn't want the whole family weighing in. You know how it gets. But we've run through all the preliminary work, the tests, the monitoring, and the doctor is recommending IVF." He finally looked up at me. His eyes were raw at the rims, the way a man's eyes look when he has been holding himself together by sheer will for far too long. "In vitro fertilization. The process is intensive, Dad. Multiple cycles, medications, procedures. The success rates are reasonable, but not a sure thing." "How much?" I asked. He blinked. "What? What does it cost?" I said. "That's what brought you here tonight, isn't it? Not the medical explanation. You could have given me that over the phone." Something in his face opened slightly. Not quite grief, more like relief. The relief of not having to talk around the real subject anymore. "The full protocol they're recommending," he said, his voice dropping. "With the medications and the monitoring and multiple retrieval cycles, it runs to about $50,000. Insurance covers almost none of it. Fertility coverage in Massachusetts is limited, and our policy has a cap, that Fletcher." I stopped him gently. "You don't have to justify the number to me." His throat moved. "Dad, I'm not asking you to. I know you're not." I pushed back my chair and got to my feet. My knees ached the way they do after a full shift, but I walked to the bedroom, to the closet shelf where the lockbox sits, and I carried it back out to the table. I set it down in front of Fletcher and opened it with the key I keep on my ring between the truck key and the yardmaster. Inside was my savings passbook. 40 years of double shifts and skipped vacations and one second-hand truck after another. 40 years of not spending money I could have spent because I always believed it might be needed for something that mattered more. Fletcher looked at that passbook and his eyes went wet immediately, not slowly, not with any dignity, but fast, the way a man cries when he has been holding it in for too long. His chin buckled. He drove his fist against his mouth. "Shoot, Dad." He got out. "Dad, I can't take your retirement. You're not taking anything," I said, firmly pulling the passbook out and reaching for a pen from the drawer. "I'm giving it. There's a difference." I opened to the balance page and slid it across so he could read the number. This covers it and leaves enough for me to get on. I've already done the math. You already did the math. His voice broke on the last word. Tuesday nights run slow at the yard, I said, which was not entirely true, but near enough. Fletcher dropped his face into both hands, his shoulders heaving with shakes. He was fighting to keep quiet and losing badly. I let him cry. A father learns when to offer a tissue and when to simply remain. I remained. I wrote the check there at the kitchen table while my son wept into his palms, tore it along the perforated edge, and laid it in front of him. When he finally raised his head, his face was mottled red and his eyes were swollen nearly shut. He looked at the check, then at me. Dad. He used the old word, the one from before. Everything became complicated and calibrated and managed. My heart turned all the way over in my chest. Get Sally through this, I told him. Take care of her through the whole process. And when that baby arrives, I tap the table twice with 2 fingers. You call me before anyone else. You hear me? I hear you. He lifted the check with hands that were visibly trembling fingers unsteady at the paper's edge. He folded it once slowly, as though it were something that could break. I promise, Dad. I swear to God, I promise. He slid the check into his jacket pocket. He stood and came around the table and pulled me into a real embrace, the kind we had not managed in the years. His arms locked across my shoulders, his face pressed into the side of my neck, the way it was when he was small and scared. Thank you, he said against my collar. Thank you. Don't thank me. I told him 2 steady pats on his back. Just bring me a grandchild. He laughed at that, a wet, broken sound that moved through his whole chest. He stepped back and scrubbed his face with the back of his wrist, embarrassed and not quite able to conceal it. He picked up his jacket. He moved toward the door. I stood at the kitchen table and watched him go. The pride sitting in my chest was large enough to be uncomfortable. My son, my boy, finding his way back to his father when the weight got too much. That was what I had worked toward, that he would still know the road back to this kitchen table when he needed it. I did not watch his taillights vanish down the street. I turned back to the table, poured the cold coffee down the drain, rinsed the cup. I opened the notebook to the page below. They have a price. I wrote July $51 IVF. Fletcher Clinic will follow up. I closed the notebook. I switched off the kitchen light. I did not know standing in that dark kitchen that the check I had just written would never reach a single clinic, that it would travel somewhere I would not learn about for months, that the word promise, which I had watched my son say with his whole trembling body, carried a meaning that night very different from what I understood it to mean. A man my age does not have many languages left that come readily. I stopped being easy with words sometime around the year Dorothea died. What I kept, what I have always kept, is my hands. I say things with my hands that I cannot arrange into sentences. That August, 6 weeks after Fletcher walked out of my kitchen, with the check folded in his jacket, I started carving. I found a block of black walnut in the scrap bin at the yard, a good dense piece, no knots about the size of a shoebox. I brought it home in the truck and set it on the workbench in the garage. Every evening after dinner, I carved the engine car first, then the coal car, then 3 passenger cars with hinged doors that actually opened. The wheels took me 2 separate attempts because the axles kept running slightly off-center. I drilled them out, started again, and got it right on the 3rd try. I am not a woodworker by trade. My hands are built for metal, for the grip and heat of a welding torch, for the particular pressure it takes to run a clean bead. Wood forgives in certain ways and refuses to forgive in others. It will not conceal errors the way metal sometimes can. Every wrong cut stays right there where you left it. I made a good many wrong cuts that August. I sanded them down and kept at it. By the time September came, the train was done. I lacquered it twice and let it dry 3 full days. I built a small wooden box to hold it lined with the same wool fabric Dorothea had used to make Fletcher's first winter blanket. I still had scraps of it in a bin in the closet. I cannot tell you why I held on to those scraps, but I am glad that I did. I brought the train to the Aldred house on the last Sunday of September. Fletcher met me at the door with a smile that wavered at the edges when he caught sight of the box. "What's that?" he asked. "Something for the baby," I told him. "When it comes." He held the door, and I carried the box into the front sitting room, where Rosalind was arranging flowers near the window. She turned when I entered. "Conrad," she said warmly. "What a surprise." I set the box on the coffee table and lifted the lid. The train rested on its wool lining. Each car coupled the wheels, centered the lacquer, picking up the afternoon light. Rosalind leaned closer. She studied it a moment with her head tilted slightly. The way a person looks at something when they are composing a response rather than feeling one. Well, she said, at last. That's very crafted, isn't it, Prescott? She called down the hallway, voice perfectly pleasant. Prescott appeared in the doorway, glass in hand. He looked at the train. He produced the sound a man makes when he is being deliberately non-committal. Handmade, he said. You do that yourself, Briley? Every piece I said. He swirled his drink. Celie's mother has already arranged for the nursery furniture from that place up in Wellesley. Custom pieces. He smiled at me, the kind of smile shaped precisely like a compliment. But I'm sure there's a spot for it somewhere. Rosalind moved the train to one side of the coffee table, not anywhere prominent. Off to the right near the edge, the way you set something aside when you are clearing space for whatever matters more. My throat went dry, but I kept my face steady. Over a summer of Sunday dinners, I had trained my face to stay neutral, while my chest did whatever it needed to do. It was after the lunch, after the civil conversation about Fletcher's firm and Prescott's portfolio, and a renovation project nobody thought to include me in, that Prescott touched my elbow and said, "Walk with me a moment, Conrad, my study." I followed him down the hall. The study was dark wood and leather, throughout the kind of room built to make whoever occupied it feel like a permanent fixture. Prescott closed the door, crossed to the desk, and pulled open the top left drawer. He produced a cream-colored envelope and extended it toward me. "For you," he said, a gesture of goodwill. I took it. Inside was a check, $10,000. Prescott Aldred's name at the top in embossed print. My name on the payee line in his secretary's handwriting. I looked at the check. I looked at Prescott. I waited. He laced his fingers together and spoke in the register of a man announcing something already settled. When the child arrives, it will carry the Aldred name as its primary identity. That means the public profile, the announcements, the events, and the social presence will reflect the Aldred family in the appropriate way. He paused. We feel it's best if your visibility in those contexts remains limited. For the child's sake. Consistency of image. You understand. My ears went hot not from shame, but from the particular slow burn of a man who has just been told very calmly and pleasantly that he is a liability to be contained. My fingers pressed tighter around the envelope. "You're paying me to disappear," I said, my voice held steady. "I am proud of that." Prescott's expression did not shift by a single degree. "I'm compensating you for your discretion," he said. "It's a practical arrangement, nothing personal." I looked at the check once more. $10,000. The figure Prescott Aldred had assigned to 40 years of being my son's father. My hands wanted to shake not from frailty, but from the effort required not to ball that check up and drop it on his Persian rug. Instead, I folded the envelope once and slipped it into my breast pocket. "I appreciate your honesty." I said the most truthful sentence the moment offered me. Prescott gave a satisfied nod and reached for the study door. "Fletcher is a talented young man," he said pleasantly, as though we had been talking about nothing in particular. "He has a real future in front of him. We all want what's best for the family. I had nothing to give that in return." I walked back down the hall. The wooden train was still sitting at the edge of the coffee table in the front room. I collected my jacket from the chair. I did not collect the train. I left it where it was. It could stay. It had been built for a child, and wherever that child ended up, it was still built for a child. On the drive home, I kept both hands on the wheel and stayed below the speed limit the entire way. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the truck for a long while. Then I took the envelope back out, opened it, and looked at the check one more time. I did not deposit it. I did not tear it up. I laid it inside the back cover of my notebook and wrote one sentence next to it. $10,000. The price of a grandfather. I turned the page. There were more things coming. I could feel it the way you feel. A pressure front moving in off the harbor, that particular drop in the air that tells you the weather is about to stop. Being polite. I brought soup. That is the detail I keep returning to. I brought a container of chicken noodle soup and a loaf of bread from the bakery on Cabot Street, because Fletcher had mentioned on the phone that Sally hadn't been eating well that week. Pregnancy fatigue, he said. Normal stuff. I didn't call ahead because I was already 3 blocks away. The soup was still hot, and I believed a father arriving with food was the sort of thing that did not require advance notice. I parked along the street in front of their building, a converted brownstone in the quieter part of town, 4-unit solid bones, the kind of place Fletcher had selected with an architect's eye for what was underneath. I took the stairs to the second floor. The soup was in one hand, the bread bag hooked over my wrist, and I was already thinking through how to hand it all off without making a moment of it, because Fletcher had a way of getting uneasy when I did things he felt he ought to be doing himself. I raised my fist to knock, and then I heard Seely's voice through the door, high and fractured, scraped down to nothing, every layer of composure she normally carried stripped completely away. Not the voice she used at Sunday dinners, not the one she deployed when warmth was being performed for a room. This was the voice that lived underneath all of that, and it was unraveling. "It's gone, Fletcher." Her words landed like a cold fist against my sternum. It's gone. I felt it go at the gala, in the car on the way home. I knew before we even reached the hospital. My raised fist stayed where it was. My legs stopped working entirely. The soup container sat warm against my palm. Fletcher's voice came back low and deliberate, every trace of his usual careful social manner gone. What remained was something I had not heard from my son before. Not grief, calculation. Sally listened to me very carefully, a pause that stretched 3 full seconds. "We can manage this. Manage it." Her voice came apart on the second word, a sob splitting straight through it. "Fletcher, I lost the baby. There is nothing to manage. I lost our keep your voice down. Not cruel, just precise. The way an architect talks about load-bearing walls. I need you to hear me. We had the announcement planned for the Rowley Crossing dinner. We have the family expecting news. We have my father-in-law's board position tied to, I don't care about the board position." Her voice pushed upward, and then she caught it, dragged it back down, and what filled the silence after that was worse than crying. A low, desperate whisper. "I can't tell people. Oh God, Fletcher, I cannot stand in front of all those people and tell them I couldn't even. You won't have to." Fletcher said it plainly. "That is exactly what I am telling you. You will not have to say a single word about it to anyone. Not your parents, not the family, not a soul. I will handle it. I will handle all of it." A sound from Seely, somewhere between a breath and a sob, ragged and small. How do you handle something like this?" "Leave that to me," Fletcher said. "I just need you to trust me. Can you do that? Can you trust me right now?" I stood in that hallway with the bread swinging from my wrist and my throat sealing shut as if something were tightening around it from the outside. My chest felt split open not from heartbreak on my own behalf, but from something worse, from recognition. From the sudden, terrible understanding that the voice coming through that door, that cold, methodical, problem-solving voice, was not the voice of a grieving husband. It was the voice of a man laying foundations. I did not knock. My feet made that decision ahead of my mind. I crouched and set the soup container down on the floor in front of their door, the bread bag beside it. My hands were steady. I am always steadiest when things are at their worst. 40 years at the torch teaches you that shaking hands costs lives, and the body eventually learns. I walked back down the stairs out onto the street into the truck. I sat behind the wheel with both hands resting in my lap. Not on the wheel, just resting, and I breathed through my nose the way I breathe when a repair is going wrong, and I need to think rather than act. 3 days on, Fletcher called me on a Sunday morning easy and bright, the voice of a man carrying nothing. He asked about the yard. He asked about the weather. He talked for 11 minutes about a renovation project his firm had won in Concord. He did not mention Selly. He did not mention the baby. He said nothing about the gala or the hospital or any of it. And something inside me went very still and very cold, the way metal goes cold once the heat source is pulled away. Not slowly, all at once. "Fletcher," I said, cutting gently across his sentence about the Concord project. "How's Seely feeling?" Not a moment's hesitation. "She's great, Dad. Tired, second trimester stuff. The doctor says it's all completely normal." Second trimester. My son looked me square in the eye, even across a phone line, even from 40 miles away, and told me his wife was in her second trimester. 3 days after I'd stood outside his door and heard her say it was gone. I told him that was good news. I told him to pass along my best. I told him I had to get back to the yard. I hung up. I reached for the notebook from the counter where it always sits and opened it to a clean page. My hand was steady. My writing came out clear and level. Late September, Fletcher's apartment. Seely lost the baby at the gala. Fletcher said, "We can manage this." 3 days on, he told me second trimester. Both facts sitting on the same page, both real. I underlined those last 4 words. Twice. I closed the notebook, and for the first time since any of this started, I understood that what I was looking at wasn't a mistake, wasn't a secret, wasn't even a simple lie. I was looking at a plan. An architect's entire education comes down to one thing: making structures that bear weight without showing the strain. You stand in front of a finished building and you see walls, windows, a roof. You don't see the calculations threaded behind every beam, every joint, every load transfer point that keeps the whole thing from folding in on itself. Fletcher had spent 8 years learning how to make complexity look effortless. That October, I began to grasp that he'd been applying that same discipline to something that had nothing to do with buildings. It started with the phone calls. Fletcher had always been a weekend caller, Sunday mornings, the occasional Saturday evening. But come October, he started ringing on weeknights, Tuesday, Wednesday, always with a reason, always carrying a task. I hate to ask, but Sally is really craving a clam chowder bread bowl from Colton's, the bakery on Route 1A. Any chance you could grab one and swing it by? She'd been so worn out. Colton's was 38 miles from my house. I know because I clocked it the first time I made the trip. Round trip 76 miles. I made that drive on a Tuesday evening in early October without giving it much thought. I made it again 4 days later when Fletcher called about a particular brand of crackers that Sally absolutely had to have, only available at a specialty grocery near the county line. The third time he called at 9:15 in the evening and asked whether I could possibly reach a pharmacy before it closed a specific prenatal vitamin Seeley's doctor had personally recommended, stocked at only one location in Boston. I was pulling on my jacket when I went still. My hand was on the zipper, and I stood there in my hallway, and I thought Boston. At 9:15 at night, for prenatal vitamins that any OB/GYN keeps stocked as samples. I did not go to Boston. I sat down at the kitchen table instead. I called Fletcher back. "I'm sorry, son," I said. "My knee is giving me trouble tonight. I don't think I should be driving that distance in the dark." A pause. "Of course, Dad. No problem at all, I'll sort it out." His voice was smooth, easy, not a single ripple of irritation. That smoothness is what unsettled me. A genuine inconvenience draws a genuine response, even a small one, mild disappointment, a sigh, something. Fletcher produced nothing because the errand I was beginning to understand had never been about the vitamins. The next morning I drove to Marblehead Medical Center on my way to the yard. I'd worked alongside their facilities crew years back, replacing ventilation equipment in the East Wing. I knew a man there, Alton Braddock, a lab technician who had moved from their fertility department over to general diagnostics about 2 years prior. I found him in the break room with a coffee and a crossword puzzle. "Alton," I said, pulling out the chair across from him, "I have a question and I need a straight answer." He set his pen down without hesitation. Alton is the kind of man who reads a room the way I read metal, fast and accurate. "Shoot," he said. "Does Marblehead Medical Center have an IVF program?" He shook his head, no hesitation at all. "Shut it down 18 months ago. Equipment costs were running too high for the patient volume. Anyone needing fertility treatment gets referred to New England Fertility Center in Boston now. Had been that way since last spring." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. "Boston," I said. "New England Fertility Center. That's the one." He reached for his pen again, then put it back down when he caught my face. "Conrad, you all right?" "I'm working on it," I told him honestly. I drove to the yard, went straight to the foreman's office and used the computer there to look up New England Fertility Center in Boston. I found their main number. I called from my cell phone standing in the parking lot with my back to the building. The receptionist was polite and professional. Patient privacy law specifically, HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which protects all medical records in the United States, meant she could not confirm or deny any patient information without written authorization. But she offered me one thing. She was permitted to say that their intake process required both partners to appear in person for an initial consultation. Both partners verified ID, no exceptions. I thanked her and hung up. Fletcher had given me a very specific story: remote consultations, mail order testing kits, a forward-thinking clinic that operated differently. Every detail had been precise enough to sound credible. I had believed it because I'd wanted to believe it, because the alternative that my son had looked me in the eye and constructed a lie detailed enough to justify asking for $50,000 was a weight I hadn't been ready to carry. I was ready now. That evening, Fletcher called again. Another errand, a pregnancy pillow, a specific brand available at a baby specialty store 40 minutes away. "I'll get it tomorrow," I said, first thing. You're the best dad. Warm, genuine sounding, completely rehearsed. Fletcher, I said carefully. How did the last appointment go? The monitoring one. Not even a breath of hesitation. Really well, numbers look good. The doctor's optimistic. Which doctor? I asked. What's her name? A half-second pause, the first one I had ever caught. Dr. Reyes, he said. She's great, really thorough. I wrote the name down that night. The following morning, I called New England Fertility Center and asked, within the bounds of what was publicly available, whether a Dr. Reyes was on staff. The receptionist checked. There was no Dr. Reyes affiliated with their practice. There never had been. I sat on the tailgate of my truck in the yard's parking lot, phone, in my hand the October wind rolling in, hard off the harbor, cold enough to make my eyes water. Or maybe it wasn't the wind, I'm not entirely sure. My son had invented a doctor. He had given his fictional physician a name, a personality, a prognosis. He had built her the way he built buildings, with enough detail to pass inspection, just enough specificity to read as real. He had done it to the man who had emptied his savings account and handed over a check without a single condition. I put the phone in my pocket. I opened the notebook. I wrote October. No Dr. Reyes, no IVF program at Marblehead Medical Center. $50,000 gone. Fletcher built this, not Selly Fletcher. Then I underlined Fletcher's name once, slowly, the way you mark a fault line on a blueprint so you know precisely where the structure is likeliest to give way. I drove home under the speed limit. The clam chowder bread bowl from Colton's was still in my freezer from the first errand. I put it in the oven for dinner. I sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open in front of me and asked myself the question I'd been sidestepping since that night outside his apartment door. If Fletcher built the lie, what is he building toward? The answer was out there somewhere. I could feel it the way I feel a weld starting to go cold, that subtle, specific wrongness that tells you the heat is running out and you need to move faster or lose the joint entirely. I needed to move faster because whatever Fletcher was building it had a deadline, and I didn't yet know what that deadline was. I have had the same credit card for 11 years. The limit is low, deliberately low, because I have never trusted myself around easy credit, the way some men don't trust themselves around easy drinking. I pay it in full every month. The statement arrives on the 4th of the month in a plain white envelope, and I open it at the kitchen table with my coffee and check every line the way I check every weld. Not because I expect a problem, but because the habit of checking is what keeps problems from becoming disasters. The October statement arrived on a Thursday morning. I opened it the way I always do, running my finger down the column of charges. Hardware store, $38. Lunch at the Yard Diner, $12. A tank of gas. Then I stopped. ProMed Specialty Supplies, Los Angeles, California, $3,522. I read it twice then, a third time. My coffee went cold in my hand. I did not recognize the name. The figure meant nothing to me. 11 years since I had set foot in California, and the largest single purchase I'd ever made outside of a vehicle or a hospital had never crested $3,500. I dialed the customer service number on the card's reverse. An automated prompt confirmed the charge was legitimate. I pressed through to a live representative, and a young woman read me what their records held. A secondary card, an authorized user card tethered to my account. Issued 6 months back in June, delivered to an East Side Marblehead address. Fletcher and Seeley's address. When exactly was that card requested? I kept my voice level, the same register I hold when I'm doing finish work, when a tremor in the hand means a ruined joint. June 14th, she told me. Submitted through the online portal. Account credentials, date of birth, everything correct. June 14th. 6 weeks before my son would walk into this house, sit across from me, and leave with $50,000 tucked into his inside pocket, the card already waiting in a drawer, somewhere, the machinery already turning, before he ever came through my front door. Something seized in my chest. Not pain exactly, more like the sensation you get when a support member fails that sudden, sickening shift in the load. I was at the bank branch on Harbor Street within the hour. The branch manager, a woman named Dorothea, mid-50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, brought my account up and rotated the screen to face me. The card was issued under an authorized user arrangement, she said, one finger resting on the monitor. Under U.S. banking rules, an authorized user can be added either by the account holder directly or by anyone who has the account holder's login and personal identifying information. Once added, she explained the user receives a physical card at whatever address was entered. They spend independently. Everything lands on my statement. So, what you're telling me, I said, is that this card was opened using my information, and I wasn't the one who opened it. Dorothea's face didn't move much, but I've spent 62 years learning to read the small shifts. She was not comfortable. I can't draw that conclusion for you, Mr. Briley. The credentials provided were valid. A pause. But if you're suggesting the account was accessed without your consent, that's a conversation for our fraud department and possibly for law enforcement. I thanked her and walked out. I wasn't ready for the fraud department. Not quite yet. 2 blocks down stood the public library. I took a seat at one of the terminal computers and entered ProMed Specialty Supplies into the search bar. The site that came up looked polished in legitimate medical hardware, theatrical production gear, prosthetics, specialty garments. I scrolled through the catalog with my jaw-locked back teeth, aching from the pressure. Then I found it, maternity and obstetric simulation, a category that apparently serves both film sets and medical schools. Silicone pregnancy prosthetics, adjustable, anatomically accurate, sold across a range of gestational stages, from first trimester to full term. The lead product, $870 per unit. 4 units with tax came to $3,522. I pushed back from the desk and held both palms flat against my thighs until the shaking subsided. 4. Fletcher had used a card bearing my name, drawing from my account shipped to his door to purchase 4 silicone pregnancy forms. 1 per trimester, I worked out plus a full-term piece for the final stretch. An entire arc, a costume built for a 9-month performance. My eyes stung. I blinked 3 times quick and hard and held the rest of it back. I was in a public library. The last time I'd wept where strangers could see me was the day we buried Dorothea, and I wasn't going to cross that line again now. I pulled out the notebook and wrote it all down. October. ProMed Specialty Supplies, Los Angeles, 3,522s. Secondary card opened June 14th. My credentials mailed to Fletcher's address. 4 silicone prosthetics gestational stages charged against my account. Then I called him. He answered on the second ring. Unhurried, pleasant the easy warmth of a man carrying no guilt because he'd made a deliberate choice to set it down. Hey, Dad, what's going on? Question about my credit card, I said. Did you open a secondary card on my account? A pause came barely half a second, but I was tuned for it the way you're tuned for the soft tick a weld makes right before it lets go. Oh, that. His voice didn't waver, smooth and practiced. Yeah, I did. You remember back in the spring? You told me if anything came up with Seeley's treatment, go ahead and use the account. You said a transfer would just be extra steps. My throat went tight. I had no memory of it. I went backward through every exchange I could locate methodically, the way I combed through a repair log. You said it at Easter dinner. He continued, not a flicker of unease. Since the IVF bills were piling up, I figured running a few supply costs through there made sense. Should have flagged it sooner. That's on me. I'll square it up with you, Dad. 100%. So measured, so appropriately contrite, the tone of a man who'd forgotten to CC someone on an email, not a man who'd filed his father's identity like a tool and used it to outfit a fiction with 4 silicone stomachs. My fists tightened on the tabletop. I pressed them open again. All right, I said. Just wanted to make sure I knew what it was. Of course, sorry for any confusion. Hey, I've got to hop on a call. Talk this weekend. This weekend, I said, and ended the call. I didn't move from that table for a long time. The afternoon light crawled across the floor, one slow panel at a time. The coffee I'd reheated sat cooling beside me. I let it go cold. When I finally opened the notebook again, I turned to a blank page and put down 4 words. Underlined them 3 times. Seeley is not pregnant, not a hypothesis, not something I feared, a finding the kind you reach when the measurements stop lying to you. The $50,000 was gone. The card had been opened without my knowledge. The prosthetics were sitting in a box somewhere. The doctor was invented. And I was at my kitchen table in South Marblehead, understanding with the particular stillness of a man who has located the hidden fracture why every single thing had felt slightly off from the start. The one remaining question was what the plan called for when 9 months finally elapsed. I was afraid I already had the answer. A welder learns early to separate what he suspects from what he can prove. Suspicion lives in your hands and how the arc tracked in the surface grain, in the sound the metal makes as it cools. It's real information, and you don't ignore it. But you also don't take a suspected bad weld to a ship owner and say, pull this vessel from service. Suspicion doesn't dry a flooded hold. Evidence does. Evidence is the X-ray image, the pressure reading, the ultrasonic trace, the thing you can lay on a table under bright light and say there. That's the failure point. That's what the record shows. Starting that October, I was done suspecting. I needed to build a record. I went out and bought a second notebook, larger quad-ruled paper, the kind I use for measurements at the yard. That Sunday evening, I sat at the kitchen table and transcribed everything from the old canvas-covered one, with the broken clasp that I have been meaning to replace for 3 years, into the new format date in the left margin, the event described in the middle column, source material, noted on the right, first-hand observation, overheard or confirmed through a third party. Same discipline as a repair log. No editorializing, no feeling. Fact, fact, fact. 6 pages when I was through. Reading it straight through felt the way it feels when you've been staring at a set of blueprints piecemeal, and you finally lay every sheet flat at once. The whole shape becomes visible. I got to the yard ahead of the shift the following morning, and found Donovan Kessler before things started up. 24 years old, our newest technician, the sort of person who could coax a dead circuit board back to life with improvised tools and still clock out on time for lunch. He was in the equipment room, working through torch calibration diagnostics, when I stopped at the doorframe. "Donovan," I said, "there's something I need a hand with off the clock. I'll make it worth your time." He looked up. "What kind of thing?" "Proper documentation," I said. "Phone conversations recorded in a way that would actually stand up." He studied me for a beat, with the look younger people sometimes give older ones when they're calculating how much the older person actually grasps about what they're requesting. "You're aware Massachusetts operates under a 2-party consent rule for recorded calls," he said. "Both parties have to know the call is being recorded. Without that, the recording's inadmissible, and you could be looking at personal liability." "I know," I said. "I'm not looking to record anything. What I need is the best method for writing down what was said immediately after a call ends in a form that would carry weight as a contemporaneous written record." What I was about to find out wasn't just a surprise. It was the kind of discovery that rearranges everything you thought you knew about a person and about yourself. Before we get there, tell me this. If someone you trusted had been quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew? Or would you gather every piece of proof first and let the truth do the work? Donovan gave a slow nod. "Contemporaneous notes," he said, "written within minutes of the conversation, while everything is still fresh. You record the date, the time, who you spoke with, and you put down as close to word for word as memory allows what was said. Massachusetts courts treat contemporaneous notes as credible evidence when the entries are consistent and specific." He paused. "Want me to walk you through a format?" "Please," I said. He opened a blank document and spent 20 minutes taking me through it, field by field, how to arrange entries in chronological order, how to log the channel of communication and phone in person written, and how to include a witness field for anything said where others were present. He printed me 3 pages of blank templates. "Thank you," I said. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing," he said, already turning back to his calibration work. Then, without looking up, "Mr. Briley, whatever this is, be careful." "That's the plan," I told him. That evening, I filled out the first 3 forms from memory, reconstructing every call Fletcher had made through October, with the detail I'd trained myself to hold: time duration. Fletcher's exact phrasing on the Dr. Reyes questioned his precise words about the secondary card and the Easter dinner story. Every entry signed and dated at the bottom in my own hand. The following Sunday brought a family lunch at the Aldred House, one of the smaller gatherings, 8 of us around the table. I went. I had gone every week, and I wasn't about to break that rhythm now. The last thing I wanted was for Fletcher to notice any change in me, but I watched differently that afternoon. Sally sat across from me in a loose cream-colored sweater that draped past her hips. For the first time, I looked at her already holding the answer instead of still searching for it. I tracked how she moved, the way she kept her elbows pulled in close when she reached across the table, the way she shifted her weight in the chair with a deliberateness that had nothing natural about it, not the unconscious redistribution of a woman whose center of gravity had genuinely changed. I watched how she rested her hands on her abdomen, It wasn't the reflexive, unthinking gesture of a pregnant woman. It was placed, arranged, like blocking in a rehearsal. Prescott raised a toast to the baby. Sally smiled, laid one hand on her stomach, and tilted her head at exactly the right angle. Every person at that table saw a glowing, expectant mother. I sat there with my water glass raised and my chest aching, like something had been torn open, thinking she has been rehearsing that. On the way home, I pulled over at the overlook on Ridge Road, where the whole harbor spreads out beneath you, the dock lights beginning to prick on as the evening came down. I took out the notebook and wrote the entry for the lunch. Seeley's posture, the positioned gesture, Prescott's toast, Fletcher's expression as he watched her perform, the specific quality of pride it held. Not a husband's pride. A director's watching an actor stick a difficult scene. Then my phone rang. Fletcher's name on the screen. I picked up immediately. "Hey, Dad, good lunch today. Right, Sally looked great." "She did," I said carefully, every word chosen, every response measured. "Listen, I wanted to ask, and tell me if this is too much, but could you come up next Saturday? Sally really wants family around more. She's been a little emotional lately, you know. Third trimester things, the doctor says it's completely normal." Third trimester, 7 months along, my son looked straight at me through a phone line, which is really all he needed, and said, 7 months. He said it with warmth, with concern, in the voice of a devoted husband. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand, hard enough that my palm ached and my knuckles went white. "Of course," I told him. "I'll be there Saturday. You're the best dad." His voice was full, genuine sounding, practiced into genuineness through so many repetitions that I couldn't locate the seam anymore between the performance and the person beneath it. "I don't know what we'd do without you." I said something fitting and ended the call. I sat at the overlook with the harbor lights spread below and wrote the entry time duration, exact phrases, the third trimester claim, filed against the established fact of a miscarriage at 11 weeks. Then I added one sentence at the bottom of the page, boxed off from the log entries with a rectangle of ink. Whatever they are building toward, the deadline is November, 4 weeks, and I am done waiting to find out what is waiting at the end of it. I closed the notebook. The lights below me softened and blurred slightly. I pressed the back of my hand once against my eyes, hard and brief, then started the truck and drove home through the dark. I went up to the ridge on a Wednesday afternoon without any warning. That was intentional. A man who announces himself hands the other man time to arrange his defenses. I had spent months watching walls go up around me, one careful course of bricks at a time. I was through extending that courtesy. The Aldred house looked exactly as it always had. White colonial black shutters, the kind of settled permanence that old money tends to confuse with integrity. I parked my truck in the circular drive directly in front of the main entrance, a spot I'd never used before. I didn't pull around to the back as I usually would. It was a small thing, but I was done making myself smaller. The housekeeper answered. I gave her my name and told her I needed to see Mr. and Mrs. Aldred. Not a request, a statement. She left me standing in the foyer and returned 2 minutes later to bring me through to the sitting room. Prescott came in first, tie-loosened reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. He stopped when he read my face, and I caught something pass behind his eyes. Not quite shock, but the look of a man who has been half expecting a particular knock, and found he wasn't entirely caught off guard. "Conrad," he said, offering his hand. "This is unexpected." I shook it once. "I know," I said. "I need to ask you something directly, and I need the same in return." He gestured toward the chairs. I stayed on my feet. He let his hand drop and remained standing as well, which told me more than the gesture itself would have. Prescott Aldred was a man who sat down when he wanted the upper hand in a room. Standing told me he wasn't sure he had it. Rosalind appeared in the doorway behind him, a glass of water in one hand, her expression arranged into the careful pleasantness she carried, the way other women wear jewelry. When her eyes landed on me, that pleasantness didn't shift. That told me something too. "Prescott," I said, keeping my gaze on him, "I need to know what you know about Seeley's pregnancy." The silence that settled over the room had mass to it, not empty silence, but the kind packed with things no one is prepared to name yet. Prescott's jaw moved once like he was rearranging something. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said. "Yes, you are," I said. My voice came out flat, and even the voice of a man who has been running too hot all morning and has at last found the temperature that works. "Seeley is not carrying a child. I have evidence of that. What I want to know is whether you were part of this from the start or whether Fletcher brought you in somewhere along the way." Prescott's face ran through something complicated. Too many calculations competing at once like a processor pushed past its threshold. Behind him, Rosalind made a small sound, barely a sound at all, and pressed her free hand flat against the doorframe, as though she needed something solid beneath her palm. Conrad, Prescott's voice dropped into a lower register, the one he used in boardrooms. I think you need to be very careful about the claims you're making in someone else's home. I'm not making claims, I said. I'm asking a question. There's a distinction, and right now that distinction matters a great deal to me. I held his gaze. My hands wanted to shake. They always do when the anger gets this deep, and I quieted them by pressing both thumbs hard against my forefingers until the pressure overrode everything else. How long have you known? Prescott let the breath out through his nose. He looked at Rosalind. She looked at the floor. In that exchange, the way his eyes went to her and came back with nothing to work with, I already had my answer before a single word came out. Since October, he said at last. The words arrived stripped clean of everything around them. No cushioning, no spin. Just the fact dropped like a wrench onto a concrete floor. My chest cracked open so wide I nearly reached for the chair at my back. October, a full year. Every Sunday dinner, every toast raised to the baby, every cream-colored sweater and carefully tilted smile, all of it staged in front of two people who had known from the very beginning and chosen the performance over the truth. You knew the night it happened, I said, holding my voice together by the sheer effort of will. Someone called you. You went to the hospital. Rosalind spoke from the doorway before Prescott could find his answer. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Silly called us from the car on the way home from the gala. Prescott drove to the hospital that night. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her face I had never found there before. Not quite remorse, but the bone-deep weariness of a woman who has been carrying a secret so long it has begun to feel like part of her own body. She was devastated, Conrad. She was absolutely destroyed. I understand that, I said, and God help me, I meant it. The grief had been real. I wasn't contesting the grief. What I can't make sense of is the choice you made in that hospital parking lot. Prescott's head came up sharply. The color drained from his face. How do you know about the parking lot? Because I have been paying attention. I said, since the evening you slipped a $10,000 check into my breast pocket and told me to make myself scarce. My voice broke on that last word just once, just at the edge, and I reeled it back. I want you to answer one thing. The child they're planning to bring in at the end of November, do you know where it's coming from? Prescott drew himself up. His face settled into the expression I'd sat across from at every Sunday dinner, polish sealed the face of a man who has decided that silence is a form of innocence. I don't know the details of that arrangement, he said. That is Fletcher and Seeley's business. My stomach turned with a disgust so physical it nearly became nausea. The details, as though a child were a line item in a catering order, as though keeping himself clear of the specifics made him something other than a man who had leased out his conscience and given it the name discretion. All right, I said. I turned toward the door. Thank you for your time, Prescott. Conrad. His voice stopped me at the threshold, stripped of its boardroom register for the first time. Just a man's voice. What are you going to do? I turned and looked back at him. Rosalind stood in the doorway, her water glass held loose and forgotten, her face open in a way it had never been at any dinner table I'd shared with her. Two people who had made a ruinous choice and were only beginning to feel the full weight of it settling onto their shoulders. The right thing, I said. 40 years late for this family, but the right thing. I walked out through the foyer, past the housekeeper, down the front steps to my truck. My legs were unsteady the whole way down, not from fear, from the particular physical cost of holding yourself rigid in a room where every nerve in your body is screaming at you. I got in. I gripped the wheel. I breathed. In the notebook that night below, Prescott's confirmation, I wrote a single question and boxed it in ink. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because writing it down made it a thing that had to be acted on, rather than a thing I could go on carrying. If they know where the child is coming from, then somewhere out there, a woman is being paid to surrender her baby, and I have 3 weeks to find that room before the exchange is complete. I found the storage unit by tracing a receipt. 3 weeks earlier, Fletcher had hung his jacket on the hook beside my front door during one of his quick visits, the kind where he drops something off that Sally supposedly needed and picks up a tool he claims to have left at my house years ago. When he left, I went to straighten the coats on the hook, and something slipped from his inside pocket onto the floor. A receipt folded into thirds. I picked it up and read it. Harborview Self-Storage, 4400 Route 9, Marblehead Unit 214, monthly rate autopay. I pressed it between 2 pages of the notebook and said nothing about it having fallen. That first morning of November, before the yard came to life, I drove out to Route 9. The facility sat low against the tree line. A long corridor of corrugated metal doors, painted the color of old rust. A gravel lot. A prefab office building up front with a window unit air conditioner that hadn't been pulled since summer. A hand-lettered sign above the door read, "Office hours 7 to 6, Monday through Saturday." It was 7:15 when I pulled in. The man behind the counter was heavy-set mid-60s, carrying the comfortable weariness of someone who has worked the same post long enough that it fits like a coat he stopped noticing years ago. His name tag said, Hui. He glanced up from a coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Manager," and raised his eyebrows. "Morning," I said. "My son asked me to come by and check on his unit, Unit 214. I'm Conrad Briley, his father." Howie set down the mug and typed something. "Briley," he said. "Fletcher Briley. That's right." He glanced at the screen, then at me. "ID." I passed over my driver's license. He held it against the screen and nodded. "You're on the authorized access list," he said, reaching for a key from the pegboard behind him. "He added you about a month back. Unit's current on payment." He came around the counter. "Your son's been in a few times. Nice young man. His wife, too." He paused. "Pretty lady, very particular about things. She came in once with paint supplies a couple weeks after they first took the unit." He pushed the office door open and led me across the gravel lot, the stones grinding under our feet in the cold morning air. "She was in there a whole afternoon. I figured they were making it into some kind of project." "Right," I said, my voice holding steady. "A project." Howie stopped at Unit 214 and unlocked the rolling door. He took the handle and pulled it upward with a rattling clang that bounced off the metal walls of the neighboring units, then stepped aside to let me go in first. The smell reached me before my eyes had adjusted fresh paint over concrete, and underneath it, something powdery and soft like talcum. The overhead fluorescent buzzed on when Howie found the switch inside the wall, and the flat, merciless light filled the space. I stood in the entrance and looked at what was in front of me. A crib still in flat-pack boxes stacked neatly against the left wall. A convertible model expensive brand, the kind that carries a child from infancy into the toddler years. Beside it, a small dresser, 4 drawers each one, slightly open with fabric edges, showing clothing folded inside with the care and patience of someone who had taken their time. A rocking chair in the corner, a blanket draped over one arm, a small lamp on a folding table near the door. The shade shaped like a lighthouse, white with a warm bulb inside, the kind that holds the dark back gently when everything else is off. And on the back wall beneath a fluorescent tube that had no business being poetic but was clouds, hand-painted in white and pale gray, uneven and soft, the kind a child might draw if a child were also a painstaking adult. Cumulus shapes layered together, running the full width of the wall from corner to corner. "She did those herself," Howie said from behind me. He sounded almost proud, the way bystanders do when they've been near something, without grasping what it actually is. "Took her 3 sessions. My throat locked. I forced it open by swallowing twice hard. I stepped fully inside and moved toward the back wall. The clouds were finely done, individual brushstrokes, visible areas where the paint had been built up in layers to suggest depth. The work of someone who was not passing time. Beneath the clouds centered on the wall, 2 words had been painted in careful block letters, not sprayed, brushed each letter deliberate, and measured the same white as the clouds above. 2 names. I stood in front of that wall with my hands at my sides and read the names that had been painted there. And the room seemed to shift slightly around me, not physically, but the way a room shifts when you understand that what you are standing inside is larger than anything you had readied yourself for. I had known walking in that I would find something. I hadn't known it would be this. I hadn't known that whoever had built this room had already given names to the children meant to fill it. "You all right?" Howie said from the doorway. He had the tone of a man who could see plainly that something was wrong, but hadn't yet determined whether it was his place to say so. "Fine," I said. The word came out rough-scraped at the edges. "Thank you, Howie. I just need a few minutes in here. Take your time. I'll be out front." The gravel complained under his boots as he walked away. I was alone in Unit 214, the lighthouse lamp. The hand-painted clouds those two names on the back wall, and I pressed the heel of my hand hard into my sternum, right where the ache had settled deepest, and I stood there breathing until the floor felt solid again. Then I made myself look around. A cardboard box sat on the folding table next to the lamp. No tape, no seal, just the flaps tucked over each other closed, but not locked. I reached for it and realized only then that my hands had gone cold, not from the air. The November chill was real, but it wasn't the culprit. My fingertips were trembling because some part of me already understood that what Fletcher had been assembling since October was right here in this container, and the moment I disturbed those flaps, the remaining 3 weeks of my life would look nothing like anything before them. I disturbed them anyway. When you've traveled this far into something, you don't stop at the threshold. You open the box, I've done it before, reach for things I couldn't unreach. My wife's hospital file the morning after the call came, the envelope from Fletcher's college holding the scholarship letter, the hood latch on a stranger's truck engine in a parking lot at 2:00 in the morning, nobody else around to help. Every one of those moments, your fingers find the edge and you know there is no going back. You go anyway. Leaving the thing unknown does its own kind of harm. The flaps came apart. A rubber band bound a sheaf of papers together, and underneath them, sitting flat at the bottom, a sealed envelope. Something else to come. I freed the papers and spread them under the lighthouse lamp. The warm glow it threw across those pages, that soft nursery store light falling over what I was about to read, will stay with me as the most quietly brutal detail of that entire morning. A contract was on top, 3 pages single-spaced. The heading in plain bold type read, "Agreement of Private Infant Placement," not adoption, not surrogacy, a phrase engineered to walk the outer edge of legal language while leaving the moral reality of the thing completely naked. I worked through it the way I work through technical specs at the yard, deliberately one clause at a time, keeping the emotion behind the comprehension and not letting it run ahead. The agreement named Fletcher A. Briley as party of the first part. Party of the second part, Annalee Pruitt, age 23, address in Lowell, Massachusetts, currently 31 weeks pregnant. The terms: she would surrender the infant at delivery in exchange for $15,000 distributed across 3 payments. $5,000 already received. Another $5,000 at 36 weeks. The remainder upon transfer, estimated date late November. Late November, 3 weeks out from where I was standing. The steadiness went out of my legs, not a stumble, not a drop, just a quiet draining sensation that moved downward through my knees, the same way warmth bleeds from metal the moment the torch lifts away. I clamped both hands onto the edge of the table and kept reading every provision, the confidentiality clause, the indemnification section, the language stripping Annalee Pruitt of any future claim to the child, any right of contact, laid out neatly professionally exploitation in the grammar of commerce. Then came the signature block, party of the first part. Beneath it in Fletcher's own hand, his name. And below that, a second line I hadn't been braced for: authorized agent. On that line, an ink signed Conrad R. Briley, my name. My signature, or rather a reproduction of it. The same signature I had put on every form Fletcher had ever brought to me. The secondary card request I had no memory of authorizing. Tax documents, insurance paperwork, the yard's accounting files I had handed off to Fletcher 2 years ago when my eyes began to fail me. He had been watching that signature long enough to replicate it with care and had placed it on a document that carried a federal prison sentence. 18 United States Code, Section 2251A. The federal child trafficking statute makes it a crime to buy or sell a minor, punishable by no less than 30 years imprisonment. My name sat on this contract as the purchasing party. If anyone found this box, before I had the chance to explain it, the narrative assembled itself without any input from me. That's when the shaking took over, not the careful managed tremor I'd been containing all morning. Something deeper originating somewhere in the torso and radiating out the way a building shakes when its core support fails. I flattened both palms on the table surface, breathed through my nose 4 counts and 4 counts out, the way Dorothea showed me in the years when the anger at the yard used to climb past the point where I could function. Conrad, she would say, her palm against my chest. You don't bury it, you breathe through it. I breathed through it. Then I did the thing I had come to do. I pulled out my phone, the one Donovan had configured for me with a high-resolution camera setting, and I documented every page, every clause, every date, every signature. When I reached the bottom of the stack, I took the flat envelope out and opened it. Inside, a photocopy of a Massachusetts state ID. My face, my address, my details. A duplicate Fletcher had produced at some point in the last 2 years, most likely lifted from the same pile of documents he had helped me reorganize after the yard moved to a new accounting system. I shot the ID copy. I shot the envelope. I photographed the exterior of the box with Unit 214 visible behind it. Then I put every piece back. Papers in the same sequence, rubber band in place, flat envelope returned to the bottom. Box flaps folded over each other, exactly as I'd found them. I angled the lampshade back to where it had been. I checked the room blanket on the same arm of the rocking chair, dresser drawers open the same fraction. Walked to the doorway. At the threshold, I stopped and looked back once. The 2 names on the wall, the clouds above them, the lighthouse lamp resting its warm light across the stacked crib boxes. "I'm sorry," I said to that room. To Annalee Pruitt, who had no idea I was alive. To the child she was carrying, who didn't know anything at all yet. "I'm going to fix this." Then I crossed the gravel to my truck, drove to the yard, and said nothing to anyone about what I had seen. Not yet. One drawer in that dresser I hadn't touched, and I already understood the way you understand a bad joint before you've even run the test. Feel it before the instrument confirms it, that what was inside would sit heavier than the contract. I returned the following morning. Howie spotted me, pulling in, lifted a hand through the office window, went back to his crossword. Familiarity builds quickly when you keep showing up. I let myself into Unit 214 with the access card he'd cut me the previous afternoon and walked directly to the dresser. Bottom drawer. I'd left it closed on purpose, not because I was afraid, but because a man doing damage assessment on a vessel can't look at everything simultaneously. You work in sequence. You take in what you can carry, you go home, you come back. The contract and the forged ID had been a full morning's wait. The drawer could hold another day while my hands found their steadiness again. They were closer to steady now. Not all the way there. Closer. I pulled it open. A legal-sized envelope rested inside, unsealed, its flap pressed shut, but not adhered. I lifted it and felt the thickness before I looked several documents, more than one layer of trouble. I carried it to the folding table, set it under the lighthouse lamp, and drew out what was inside. The first page made the edges of my vision go soft. Not tears, not yet. The body does something different when it's been hit too many times, inside a narrow window of hours, a kind of physiological lag, like a circuit that has taken too much current. What I was holding was a completed petition for a civil restraining order under Massachusetts general laws, the provision enabling a family or household member to seek court protection from harassment, stalking, or threatening conduct. The petition had been filled out in Seeley's handwriting. The named respondent was Conrad R. Briley. The name on the petition belonged to Celinda Aldred Briley, filed on the minor child's behalf. Briley anticipated arrival late November. A child who had not yet drawn breath, had not yet entered the world. Someone had drafted a restraining order before that child existed, building a case around a catalog of fabricated conduct, menacing language, unwanted intrusions, explosive scenes at family events. Not one incident among them real. Every word composed in the calm, practiced tone of a person who had done their homework on how such filings are supposed to look. No judge had touched it. It had never reached a courthouse, but it was finished, sitting there polished and complete, waiting only for a date to be written at the top and a clerk's window to receive it. I laid it on the table. Both fists came down against the surface knuckles first. Then I breathed the way Dorothea had taught me years ago. 4 slow counts in. Somewhere above me, the lamp gave a low, steady hum. The painted clouds hung behind my shoulders. 4 counts out. I reached for the second document. It was a letter handwritten 3 pages in Fletcher's penmanship, the very hand I had watched struggle to grip a pencil at the kitchen table on Maplewood Street when he was small. The hand I had guided through school assignments, birthday cards, the thank you notes Dorothea had required him to send for every gift, without exception. 3 pages addressed to Prescott and Rosalind Aldred, and I read each one through. The letter took up my wife's death as its subject. It told them Dorothea had not died of pancreatic cancer, found too late. It said she had died because of what Fletcher described as years of financial neglect and emotional abandonment. A husband so locked into his own pride and his working man's sense of himself that he had failed to get her proper care while there was still time. It painted me as a man who had never forgiven Fletcher his success, who had needled him with cutting remarks at family occasions, who made a habit of turning up where he wasn't wanted and leaving a mess behind him, who had on one occasion made some kind of physical move towards Celie that left her shaken. None of it bore any connection to anything that had ever happened, not a word of it. By the time I reached the third page, my hands were shaking badly enough that I had to put the letter down and press both palms hard against my legs just to hold myself still. Something behind my eyes was burning, not the short, controlled sting of a man keeping his composure, something deeper than that, a slow, rising heat coming up from behind the sternum, from the place where I'd been holding everything down for weeks. I pushed my fingers against my closed eyelids until the pressure bloomed orange, then deepened to red, then went simply black. Dorothea had not surrendered. She had accepted every treatment they put before her, and in front of Fletcher, she had never let one word of suffering escape her, because she refused to be the source of his fear. I had run myself into the ground, paying for every one of those treatments. She deserved every hour, every dollar, every possible chance, and I would have signed over the yard to give it to her. And what my son had done was take all of that, take her dying and the love I carried for her and the 14 worst months of my life, and shape it into something sharp and hand it to her parents like a tool. I lifted the letter again. The tremor hadn't left my hands, but my eyes had steadied the way they do once you've pushed through something that nearly drops you and found your footing on the far side. I finished the third page. Fletcher had written at the bottom, "Given the above history, we believe it is in the best interest of the child that Conrad Briley's access be permanently restricted from birth. We have prepared the necessary documentation and ask for your support in ensuring this is filed promptly once the child arrives." I photographed everything, the restraining order application, every sheet of the letter. I pinned my elbow against my side to brace against the shaking and held the camera as level as I could manage. Then I returned it all to the envelope, folding the flap back precisely as I'd found it, settled it into the bottom drawer, and eased the drawer closed until it sat flush. I got to my feet and swept the room, with my eyes one final time. The clouds, the lamp, the stacked crib boxes, the two names painted on the wall, and I spoke into the empty air to no one present, to Dorothea, wherever she had gone, and to the 62 years that had carried me to this particular storage unit on Route 9 on a November afternoon. "All right," I said. The words came out rough around the edges, but they came. "All right, now I know everything. Now I know what I'm dealing with." I walked out. I locked up behind me. Howie lifted a hand in my direction without raising his eyes from his crossword. The drive home I made in complete silence, no pulling over, no hand pressed against my face, just both hands on the wheel the whole way through. Back at my kitchen table, I opened the notebook and wrote 13 pages straight. No breaks my script, growing tighter and smaller as the pages turn the way it always compresses when I'm racing to capture something before it slips. On the last page at the very bottom, I put down one sentence and drew 3 lines beneath it. 12 days. Colette Fairweather, tomorrow morning. The evidence was in hand. What I lacked was someone who understood what to do with it. Colette Fairweather came to me the same way. The most valuable things in my life have always come through someone who had already walked through fire and survived it. Burl, my foreman at the yard, had fought a custody battle 2 years prior that had very nearly destroyed him. He passed me her name and number on a strip of masking tape, the only writing surface Burl ever seems to carry, and never once asked what I needed it for. That is a rare kind of friendship, the kind worth having before you run out of years. Colette Fairweather's office occupied the 14th floor of a building in Boston, 45 minutes from Marblehead, when the roads were clear. Her waiting room held 2 chairs and a fern that had been carefully tended for years. A young man at the front desk with a solid handshake offered me water, and wasn't just saying it. Colette herself appeared at the doorway to collect me, a compact woman, late 50s, silver hair, worn close reading glasses hanging from a simple chain, and a grip that made it plain, within the first second, that she had spent her career in rooms full of people who had underestimated her and had grown entirely indifferent to the experience. "Mr. Briley," she said, guiding me toward the conference table. "Burl speaks well of you. Sit down and tell me everything, and please do not leave anything out because you think it will make you look bad. The things people leave out are always the things I need most." I sat down, opened the notebook, and took her through all of it, from the first Sunday dinner to the check to what I'd found inside that storage unit. Everything sequenced with dates attached. 40 minutes, no pauses. Colette worked a yellow legal pad and put 3 questions to me across the whole stretch, each one precise, each one aimed squarely at a seam I had skated past. When the last of it was out, she set her pen on the table and regarded me with the look of a woman adding a column of very large figures. Moreover, she said, the forged signature on the infant placement contract, that is your most immediate exposure, under federal law specifically. 18 United States Code, Section 2251A, purchasing a child, is a federal offense carrying a mandatory minimum of 30 years. Your name appearing on that contract alongside the copied ID puts you in a position where you could be named as a co-conspirator before you ever get the chance to offer an explanation. Her finger came down on the legal pad. The photographs, do they carry timestamps? Yes, I said. Donovan configured the phone so the date and time are embedded in every file. Something moved in Colette's expression. Not a smile exactly, more the look that crosses a person's face when something they needed turns out to be present. Good, she said. That puts you inside the unit as a witness, not a party at a documented moment. Paired with the running notes you've maintained, we have the foundation for a coherent narrative of discovery rather than participation. She brought her weight forward onto the table. Now, the infant, Annalie Pruitt. My chest went tight at the name. 23 years old, I said. Lowell, she was 31 weeks along when the contract was signed, which puts her somewhere around 33, 34 weeks at this point. Colette's delivery stayed even, but something in her eyes moved something that lived underneath the professional surface and wasn't entirely calm. Mr. Briley, the private infant placement agreement Fletcher signed, carries no legal force under Massachusetts law. Massachusetts General Statutes, Section 45A, 728B, bars pre-birth relinquishment arrangements made for compensation. What Fletcher has constructed here is not a binding contract. It is a piece of criminal evidence. She drew her calendar across the table toward her. I'm reaching out to the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families today about Ms. Pruitt. She needs to understand what her rights are. That child has to be protected before anyone attempts a transfer. The corners of my eyes went hot and wet, and I pushed my fingers against them, embarrassed and passed, caring about it at the same time. Thank you, I said, and the words scraped coming out. Mr. Briley, don't thank me yet, Colette said, but there was no edge to it. We have 11 days until Thanksgiving. That is our window. The Aldred dinner, 40 witnesses, a large projection screen, a family that has spent months keeping a very tight grip on what people know. If we execute this correctly, the exposure lands in the room where it inflicts the most structural damage to Fletcher's credibility and the least to yours. She picked up her pen. I'll contact the FBI Boston field office regarding the federal child trafficking elements. That falls outside local jurisdiction. 18 U.S.C. 2251A is a federal statute, which means the investigation belongs to federal agents, not Marblehead PD. She looked at me directly. You will not confront Fletcher. You will not contact Seeley. You will not speak to Prescott Aldred again before Thanksgiving. Do you understand me? I understand, I said. And the USB drive Donovan is preparing 3 copies stored in separate physical locations. One with me, one in your safety deposit box, one with someone outside the family you trust completely. Burl, I said, without hesitating. Burl gets a copy. She agreed. She rose and extended her hand across the table, and I took it. Go back to the yard, Mr. Briley. Do your work. Keep things ordinary. Let them go on believing you're still the man who hasn't figured anything out. I drove back to Marblehead with both hands on the wheel and something sitting in my chest that hadn't been there in months. Not hope exactly. Something older than hope and steadier. The feeling you get as a welder when the joint is finally prepped right and the equipment is dialed in and every variable is where it belongs before the torch ever touches metal. Readiness. The particular earned readiness of a man whose preparation is behind him and who only has to hold still until the moment ripens. 11 days. I could hold still for 11 days. Colette asked me to come back 2 days before Thanksgiving. Her conference table had changed since my first visit. 3 yellow legal pads with color-coded sticky notes along the margins. A printed timeline running the full length of the table that she had assembled from my notebooks. Seeing my own notes reorganized inside someone else's structure made my throat seize up in a way I hadn't seen coming. Sit, she said, already in motion. I have updates, and I need 2 more things from you. I placed the envelope on the table in front of her, the one I'd been carrying in my truck for 2 weeks sealed, because some things need to sit before you're ready to put them to use. The magazine, I said, and the check. Colette opened the envelope. She drew out the folded check first. Prescott Aldred's embossed name printed across the top, $10,000, my name in the pay line. She held it away from her at arm's length and examined it the way a jeweler holds a stone up to the light when looking for something hidden inside. He actually wrote this, she said, and the weight of it told me she hadn't expected it, even though she'd needed to see it herself. 2 months ago, I said, in his study. He called it a gesture of goodwill. Colette set the check down and picked up the magazine, a glossy Marblehead social publication from August, the kind that runs charity dinners and real estate announcements and photographs of families who have chosen to make their contentment into a public record. I'd held onto it because something had felt off about it when it came out, and I hadn't fully understood what I was sensing until now. Page 32, I said. She turned to it. A full-page photograph from the Rowley Crossing Foundation dinner. The Aldred family, Prescott and Rosalind in the center. Fletcher to the left, Sally radiant to the right. The caption read, "The Aldred-Briley family celebrates another year of community partnership." In the background, partially concealed behind a decorative column, visible only as a shoulder and half a face, was a man in a good flannel shirt with work-worn hands hanging at his sides. Me, tucked behind a column, cropped nearly out of existence, present only as faint proof that I'd been there at all. Colette studied that photograph for a long moment. Her jaw tightened once. "This," she said, pressing her finger to the page combined with the check, "establishes a documented pattern of deliberate exclusion, not a family falling out. A sustained campaign to erase you from the record before the child arrived." She looked up. "It goes in." "Good," I said. She put both items aside and moved to her legal pad. "The FBI made contact with Annalee Pruitt on Monday," she said, and something in my chest released that I'd been holding clamped shut for a week. "She is cooperating fully. She had no idea the arrangement was illegal. She was told this was a private adoption, handled through a family attorney. She has retained her own counsel and is not going forward with the transfer." My eyes burned at once. I pressed my thumb and forefinger into the bridge of my nose and held them there until it passed. "She's all right," I managed. "She's frightened," Colette said, with the directness of someone who respects you enough to hand you the truth unvarnished. "But she has people around her now. The child will not be transferred. That matter is closed." She paused. "The federal investigation into Fletcher is ongoing. That proceeds on its own track, regardless of what happens Thursday." I nodded. My voice wasn't fully reliable at that moment, so I left it alone. "Thursday," Colette said, drawing a single typed page from the bottom of the pile and sliding it across to me. "The sequence. You arrive with the other guests. You do not initiate contact with Fletcher or Seeley. You do not approach Prescott privately. You wait until after the toast. Prescott always makes a toast to the baby at these dinners. Correct. Every single time," I said after the toast. "That is your moment." She tapped the page. "You go to Sally directly. One sentence calm, quiet within earshot of those nearby. Then, whatever she does next, and based on everything you've told me, it won't be calm. The room will have already heard you. The remote is loaded. Donovan confirmed the file format is compatible with the Aldred projector setup. He'll be there early to load it in directly." "He tested it twice," I said. "Good." Colette settled back in her chair and looked at me across the table with the expression of a woman who has prevailed in enough courtrooms to know exactly where a case is standing. 2 FBI agents will be in the parking area Thursday evening. They are there for Fletcher and Sally, not for you. She paused. "Conrad, are you ready for what happens to your son after Thursday?" The question landed on my chest like a dropped tool. I'd been holding the answer for days and had not yet spoken it to another person. My throat moved twice before anything came. "No," I said honestly. "But I'm ready to do the right thing regardless. Those aren't the same thing, and I stopped pretending they were about a week ago." Colette held my gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her pen, made a final note, and got to her feet. "Thursday evening," she said. "Drive carefully." I shook her hand. I walked out through the waiting room, where the carefully tended Fern sat in its corner, still alive, still being looked after. On the drive back to Marblehead, I didn't turn the radio on. I needed the quiet. I needed 45 minutes with the man I was about to stop being. The man who had absorbed the blows bent himself into shapes that suited everyone else. and say a proper goodbye to him before Thursday arrived and called for someone different. The night before Thanksgiving, I sat at my kitchen table with Dorothea's photograph in front of me and spoke to her out loud for the first time in 23 years. I know how that sounds. I am not a man who believes the dead can hear us. I am a man who believes in metal and heat and the precise physics of joining two separate things into one permanent thing. But that night, I needed to hear my own voice say out loud what was going to happen the following day. And the only person I had ever been able to say hard things to without first calculating the effect on them was my wife. So, I set her photograph on the table, poured 2 fingers of the rye whiskey I keep for occasions, and I talked. Tomorrow is going to end something I said to her. However it falls, Fletcher is not coming back from this. Not to me, maybe not to himself either. My voice caught on that last sentence, and I pressed my fist hard against my mouth, felt my chin go, hauled it back. I need you to know, I tried Dorothea. I kept my hands open the whole time, even when I should have made a fist earlier than I did. The kitchen held its quiet around me. The refrigerator ran steadily in the background. The first serious wind of the season worked through the oak trees outside, and the branches dragged against the gutters the way they always had. Same sound, same trees, 30 years of it. Some things stay exactly as they are no matter what else moves. I'm going to be all right. That's what I told her. I want you to know that as well. Whatever comes on the other side of tomorrow, I'm going to be all right. I finished the rye whiskey. I went to bed. Sleep didn't come easily, but it came, which was more than I'd counted on. I was dressed and behind the wheel by 7 the next morning, Thanksgiving Day. The sky above Marblehead wore the specific flat gray of a New England November. Not threatening, just settled the way the sky gets once it has made up its mind that winter is coming, and no one's preference on the matter changes anything. I drove up the ridge 2 hours before the first guests were due to arrive. I needed to speak to Prescott and Rosalind before the evening's performance began. The housekeeper admitted me with the expression of a woman who has trained herself not to be surprised. Prescott was in the kitchen in his shirt sleeves the first time I had ever seen him, without a jacket inside his own house. That small glimpse of ordinary domesticity almost made what I was about to do harder to carry. Almost. Conrad! His voice had the careful, measured neutrality of a man who'd been anticipating this moment and had no intention of letting it show. You're early. I need 5 minutes, I said. Both of you before anyone else arrives. Rosalind appeared in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands, and when her eyes found my face, her own went very still. The 3 of us moved to the study. Prescott did not offer me a chair this time. We stood all 3 of us in front of the desk with the Persian rug beneath our feet, and I looked at them both the way I had been looking at everything for months, directly without the softening lens of hoping I'd misread things. I'm giving you one opportunity, I said. If you stand up at that dinner table tonight and tell the truth, all of it in front of your guests on your own terms, I will let that become the record. You'll have chosen honesty when honesty cost you something real. That matters. I paused. But if you don't, then what unfolds tonight unfolds exactly as I've arranged it, and the record will show that the truth had to be dragged out of this house against your will. Prescott's face moved through 3 different expressions in the span of about 4 seconds. Calculation, anger, and then something I hadn't prepared for, something that looked just for a moment like relief, like a man who has been bracing a collapsing structure with his own body for too long, and has just been told he's allowed to step back. But he didn't take it. His jaw hardened, his shoulders squared. Conrad, he said, with the voice of a man retreating behind every wall he owns, I think you should allow this evening to proceed as planned and trust that families are capable of working through their own difficulties. Something broke in my chest, not grief, but finality. The clean, decisive sound of a door swinging shut for the last time. All right, I said. My voice was flat and dry and entirely done. Then tonight proceeds the way I planned. I turned to Rosalind. She was working the dish towel between both hands, wringing it, her knuckles pale and sharp. Her eyes were wet along the lower rims, not crying, but holding it the way a person holds something too heavy for too long until the effort begins to show in their whole body. Rosalind, I said, and my voice came out gentler than I'd meant it to. I am sorry about Celie. I am genuinely sorry for what she has been carrying. But I am not sorry for what I am going to do tonight, and I think somewhere below all of this, you already know why. Rosalind's chin trembled once, one unguarded moment before she pressed her lips together and turned her eyes to the window. Her way of answering without answering. I left them in the study. I walked back through the hallway past the dining room where the catering crew was laying out the long table, white linen, the good china crystal that gathered the pale morning light coming through the tall windows. 40 place settings. 40 people who would fill this room in 5 hours. I stopped at the threshold and looked at the projection screen, positioned at the head of the room. Donovan had confirmed the file format 3 times. The remote in my vest pocket had been tested twice. Everything was in place. I walked out the front door, down the steps, and to my truck. I drove to the bottom of the ridge, pulled over at the overlook, and looked down at the harbor. The November water was gray and heavy, the way it gets in the weeks before the first real cold sets its grip and changes everything about it. I took the wooden train pieces from my jacket pocket. The fragments I'd retrieved from the Aldridge sitting room. That same afternoon I left the train behind. Pieces that had broken loose in the box during the drive. I hadn't been able to throw them away. I held them in my palm, those splinters of black walnut that had taken me 3 months to shape, and I closed my hand around them. Tonight, I said to the harbor, to the cold water, to the 40 years of labor that had built me into a man capable of doing what I was about to do. Tonight it ends. I want to tell you exactly what happened at that dinner table, because I've had to recount it more than once, since to Colette, to the federal investigators, to the detective who showed up at the yard the following week, carrying a recorder and a notepad. Each time I tell it the same way, in order, slowly, the way it actually happened. The guests arrived at 6, all 40 of them filling the Aldridge dining room, the way money fills a room, loudly, confidently taking up all available space, as though it had always belonged to them because it always had. I was already at my end of the table when they came in, my good flannel, my work-worn hands folded in front of me, the remote in my vest pocket, the wooden train pieces in my jacket pocket, the USB already loaded into the projector system, which Donovan had accessed remotely at 5:45 using Prescott's own Wi-Fi password, the one written on the card in the kitchen drawer that I had photographed 3 weeks earlier. Sally sat near the center of the long table, radiant in a cream-colored evening dress, the silicone curve of the prosthetic beneath it catching candlelight like something alive. She laughed at the right moments. She touched Fletcher's arm when she wanted people's eyes to move to them together. She was extraordinary. I say that without any bitterness behind it. The performance she had maintained for 8 months in front of everyone she knew demanded a kind of discipline I could recognize even if I couldn't admire it. Fletcher played his part as well, refilling glasses, guiding conversations, the consummate host. He glanced at me twice across the table and smiled. Both times warm, easy, the smile of a man who is certain he has accounted for every variable in the room. He had not accounted for me. At 8:00, Prescott rose from the head of the table. He tapped his crystal glass once, and the room settled itself. "To family," Prescott said, lifting his glass toward Celie, "and to the newest member who is almost here." 40 glasses rose. I raised mine with them. Over the rim, I watched Celie tilt her head and rest her hand on her stomach, and receive the love of every person in that room. And my chest ached with the particular pain of a man who knows everyone else in this room is still inside a story he has already read all the way to the end. I set my glass down. I stood up. The room didn't notice at first. A man getting to his feet at the far end of a 40-person table reads initially as someone reaching for the breadbasket. But I walked. I walked the full length of that table in the candlelight, hands at my sides, every step deliberate. By the time I reached the midpoint, heads had started to turn. By the time I came to a stop beside Celie's chair, the room had gone the particular kind of quiet that descends when 40 people decide at the same instant to pay attention. I looked at Celie. Her eyes came up to mine. Something moved across her face, small, barely there, but I read it the same way you read the first wrong color in a bead of molten metal. Calculation hiding behind warmth. "Celie," I said, quiet and even pitched for the 15 people sitting closest to us. I think it's time to stop the performance. What unfolded in the next 3 seconds will take me what remains of my life to fully reckon with. The color drained from Celie's face, then rushed back dark red. Then, whatever she had been keeping behind her eyes gave way all at once. 8 months of silicone and timed smiles and rehearsed warmth. The whole scaffolding, dropping like a wall whose footing has been cut. Her arms swept across the table. Her fingers found the soup bowl lobster bisque still steaming, and she threw it straight at my head. Heat before impact. The bisque ran down my face and throat and soaked the front of my shirt, scalding, and as the bowl struck me, I heard the wooden train pieces leave my jacket pocket and hit the floor. Those black walnut splinters I'd been carrying for weeks, skittering across the white linen and scattering over the stone with a sound I can only describe as final. Celie was on her feet now, her whole frame shaking, one finger aimed at me that trembled too hard to hold its line. She screamed it loud enough to rattle the glassware in the cabinet at her back. "You stole from me. You ruined everything that was supposed to be my family, my children. And you stood there and you watched me lose everything. And you did nothing. And now you want to take this too." Every one of those 40 people had gone completely still. A fork hung motionless in midair. A woman, at the far end of the room, had both hands pressed over her mouth. Then Fletcher moved. He came around the table at speed, wrapped his arm around Celie, and she went into him sobbing in deep, convulsive waves that moved through them both. Then he turned to face me, his father standing there with soup cooling on his skin and fragments of carved wood at his feet. And he said the words I will be hearing when I die. "Dad." The words split open with a fury I had never once in his life heard him carry. "You knew she was fragile. You've always had to make everything about yourself, haven't you? This is her night. This has always been her night." I held my eyes on my son for a long moment, the man I had worked back-to-back shifts for, wept for, pressed a check for $50,000 across a kitchen table to while he shook with what I had taken for gratitude. The man who had spent 3 pages describing his mother's death and hammered the whole thing into a blade. My hand went into my vest pocket. It was perfectly still. I closed my grip around the remote and gave Fletcher one last look. Unhurried, clear, the look of a man who has already decided, and I pushed the button. The projector came alive behind me. I felt the room shift the way a room shifts when 40 people receive the same shock at the same instant, a pressure change, something almost physical. I didn't turn to look at the screen. I had studied every image on it already. I watched Fletcher's face, watched the blood leave it, watched his arm fall away from Celie's shoulders, watched the man who had constructed his entire life on the belief that his father was too simple to see, all of it at once with no path back from the seeing. Those 40 people had their eyes on the screen. I kept mine on them. That is what I'll carry to the grave, not the slides themselves, but the expressions on 40 faces, as understanding hit them all together. The way it moves through a room, that kind of knowledge. Like a change in air pressure, like the instant before a storm cracks open and you register it in your sternum before the sound reaches you. The screen laid it all out. The ProMed receipt, $3,500, my account number, my name, my address. The silicone prosthetics catalog page with a red ink circle drawn by Colette's assistant. The infant placement contract. Fletcher A. Briley on the signature line, Conrad R. Briley forged underneath as authorized agent. Annalee Pruitt, 23 years old, Lowell $15,000 seller late November delivery, the copied ID, the restraining order application. Celie's handwriting my name in the respondent field, a list of behaviors I had never performed, set down in the bloodless language of legal forms. Then Fletcher's letter, 3 pages his version of Dorothea's death, the word neglect underlined in the original ink. Then the magazine me behind the column nearly cropped out of existence. Then Prescott's check, $10,000. The going rate for a grandfather, 4 minutes for the full sequence to run. The room gave nothing back the entire time, not a whisper, not a shifted chair. Prescott was first to move. He rose from his seat at the head of the table, looked across the room, at his daughter walked to her, and hit Celie across the face with his open hand. It had nothing to do with what had been done to me. I understood that without question. It was the rage of a man who has spent months managing a catastrophe in secret and has just watched that management become the catastrophe projected at full size for every person whose opinion he has spent his life cultivating. Celie's cry came sharp, and she seized the edge of the table, her legs folding under her. Fletcher went down to his knees on the stone. He turned toward Prescott, and Rosalind, both arms stretched out, his voice shredding into something high and fractured and young in a way I hadn't heard in 20 years. "She made me," he said. "I told her it was wrong. I told her from the beginning. She pushed me into every part of this. You have to understand that." Rosalind placed both hands over her mouth and left the room. She didn't run. She walked straight back, deliberate, with the bearing of a woman who has just arrived at a full accounting of what she stood by and permitted. She went through the kitchen door, and the door closed behind her, and she did not return. The two FBI agents entered from the front of the house, measured unhurried, no theater to it. One went to Fletcher. The other took up a position near Seeley. Fletcher looked up at the agent standing over him, and what was left of his composure went out completely. Stripped down to what was actually there, a 35-year-old man on his knees on a cold stone floor, watching the architecture of his own making descend on him. I crouched down and gathered what I could of the wooden train pieces from the floor, working between the feet of guests who still hadn't moved, who were watching the room come apart around them, like witnesses to something they had no frame for. I got every fragment I could find and put them back in my jacket pocket. Then I walked to Prescott's chair at the head of the table and placed a white envelope on the linen in front of him. The revised will Colette Fairweather's letterhead, a notary seal on the last page, witnessed and certified 3 days before. Briley Boatworks and all associated holdings $4 million in assessed value, signed over entirely to the Children's Foundation of Massachusetts. Fletcher Briley's name removed from the beneficiary line. Prescott looked at the envelope and left it where it lay. "The check you gave me," I said, keeping my voice down, "is inside. I never cashed it. I never needed your money, Prescott. I needed you to know I never touched it." I stood straight, took one last look at the room, the linen, the crystal, the 40 people who were going to be carrying this night somewhere inside them for the rest of their lives. Then I went out the front door into the cold of November. Through the door behind me, I heard Fletcher's voice. Not raised, just my name spoken once the way you say a word when some part of you already knows it's the last time you'll have the right to say it. "Dad," I didn't stop. Fletcher came to the yard 3 days after Thanksgiving. The season's first snow had moved through the night, before thin spare, just enough to lay white over the gravel and the dock lines. The harbor behind him was the color of pewter. The whole scene had a quiet to it that wasn't real. I heard his car pull in. I put down my wrench and went to the door. He looked like what he was, a man 3 days without sleep. Thinner, whatever straightness he had always carried in his spine, that architect's posture had gone out of him, leaving only shoulders drawn down under a weight that had no support left beneath it. He made it most of the way across the yard before his knees gave one hand grabbing the side of the equipment shed, half down in the thin snow. What came out of him then wasn't words. It was the sound a structure makes when the final support lets go. "Dad." The syllable broke as it left him. "Dad, I am so sorry. I am sorry for all of it. For the money, for the card, for what I wrote about Mom." His fist went against his mouth, his whole body shaking, tears running down his face and falling into the snow below him. "I knew what you did for her. I always knew what you did. I don't know how I let myself—" He couldn't get to the end of it. I didn't require him to. I put my hand in my jacket pocket. I drew out the old canvas-covered notebook broken clasp, 4 decades of repair logs, and the full account of everything this year had brought. I turned to the page where his name sat in my own hand, Fletcher Briley. The same hand that had signed permission slips and written birthday cards for him since he was small. I uncapped my pen. I pulled a single line through his name, measured and deliberate all the way across. I looked at him and said it the way a welder talks about a joint that has failed past the point of repair. My son died the day he decided that grease on his father's hands was something to be ashamed of. Fletcher closed his eyes. 2 more tears came down his face. He left them there. I put the notebook away. I went back inside. I shut the door. 3 weeks on, I drove out to Haverhill and Merrimack, small yard, working waterfront. A foreman named Bill who walked me through the equipment and had no need to fill the silence with talk. I started on a Monday. I brought the notebook. I brought the wooden train pieces which I had been fitting back together on my workbench in the evenings, the cracks still visible, the joints rough where they had broken, but holding, standing. On the last page I put down one line. December 2024, starting over, not running, choosing. I closed the notebook. I went to work. I am 62 years old. I spent 40 years welding metal at a harbor yard and believed I had a real understanding of what makes things hold. I was wrong about that. This year made it plain, the joints that matter most in a man's life aren't forged from steel. They're built from trust. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this one, I want to thank you, genuinely. Stories like this one are not easy to carry, and they are not easy to tell. What this year cost me cannot be measured in dollars or legal fees, or even the name I removed from a will. It cost me the version of my son I had spent a lifetime believing in. I believe God doesn't waste our pain, that He uses even the hardest seasons to show us what we are actually made of and what we were always meant to let go of. That is the only framework that made any of this bearable. If these grandpa revenge stories, these father stories of loss and hard-won dignity have meant anything to you, then let me leave you with what I actually learned. First, document everything from the very first moment something feels wrong. Memory fades, paper doesn't. Second, do not confuse loyalty with silence. Protecting the people you love sometimes means saying the thing no one once said. Third, when someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe the actions, not the explanations that follow. Fourth, you can love a person completely and still refuse to be destroyed by them. Those two things can live in the same chest at the same time. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me what you took from it. If you know someone who is carrying something like this right now, a parent, a grandparent, a friend who has been lied to by the people closest to them, share this with them. They may need to hear it more than you know. Subscribe to Grandpa's Revenge so you don't miss what comes next. And thank you. I mean that. Now go take care of the people who deserve it.